I didn't find out until a Tuesday. Not a phone call, not a conversation. A text. My daughter-in-law sent it to the group chat, and my son had already reacted to it with a thumbs up before I even finished reading. Booked Asheville for Thanksgiving week. 4 nights at the inn. Hiking the Blue Ridge. Bonfire nights. So excited. Itch. That was it. No question mark. No, Mom. Are you free? No, nothing. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, looking out the window at the maple in my backyard. The leaves were just starting to turn. I'd planted that tree the year my son was born. 38 years ago, I'd pressed that sapling into the ground with my own 2 hands, and now it was taller than the house. I picked up my phone again and scrolled up. The chat had been active for 3 days. 3 days of planning I hadn't been part of. My son, my daughter-in-law, her sister's husband. 4 adults making plans for a trip I found out about as an afterthought. Or maybe not even that. Maybe I wasn't supposed to find out at all. Maybe I'd been added to the chat for something else entirely, and this was just an accident. I didn't text back. I put the phone in my purse and drove to the grocery store, because that was what I had planned to do that morning, and I was not going to let a group chat rearrange my Tuesday. But in the cereal aisle, I cried, just for a minute, just enough that a young woman with a toddler in her cart looked at me with soft eyes and asked if I was okay, and I said yes, thank you, I'm fine, just allergies. She didn't believe me, but she was kind enough to let it go. I'm 67 years old. I retired from 31 years of teaching 4th grade in Raleigh, North Carolina. I raised my son alone after his father left when the boy was 9. I worked 2 jobs for 4 years so he could have new cleats for soccer and a real winter coat and a computer for school, when computers were still something he saved up for. I drove him to practice, to college visits, to the airport when he moved to Denver at 24 for a job. I let him go, because that's what you do when you love someone. You let them go and you don't make it about yourself. I had done everything right, and somehow I was standing in the cereal aisle, crying over a group chat. That week, I called my friend Audrey. We'd taught together for 20 years, and she was the kind of person who told you the truth without making you feel stupid for not seeing it yourself. I told her about the text, about the 3 days, about the thumbs up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do about it?" And I said I didn't know. She said, "Yes, you do." She was right. I did know. I just hadn't let myself think it all the way through yet. Because thinking it all the way through meant admitting how much it hurt. And I had spent a very long time being the kind of woman who didn't let things hurt her for too long. My son called that weekend. We talked about the weather, about his work, about the football scores. He did not mention Thanksgiving. I did not mention it either. At the end of the call, he said, "Love you, Mom." And I said, "Love you too." And we hung up, and I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. That night, I opened my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. I'd been thinking about a trip, not in any serious way, just the way you think about things when you need something to hold on to. My late husband, Chester, had always talked about New England in the fall. We'd never made it. He'd been gone 6 years, and that trip had just stayed in the category of things we'd meant to do. I typed New England fall foliage train. And then, because I was feeling something I couldn't quite name, I added luxury. What came back stopped me. There was a train, a real one, not Amtrak, a private rail journey, 3 nights, 4 days that ran from New York through the Berkshires and up into Vermont and New Hampshire at peak foliage season. It had a dining car with white tablecloths. It had private compartments with fold-down beds and a window that took up nearly the whole wall. It had a lounge car where you could sit with a glass of wine and watch the hills go by. It also had a price that made me close the laptop. I opened it again 10 minutes later. Chester had left me in good shape. I'd worked my whole adult life and spent carefully, and I wasn't a woman who bought things for herself. Not really, not in that way. I had a savings account I thought of as the someday account. Someday I'd redo the kitchen. Someday I'd take a real vacation. Someday, when things settled down, when the right moment came. I was 67. I was in good health. I could hike 4 miles without stopping. My knees were fine. My heart was fine. The doctor told me at my last checkup that I was, in her words, annoyingly healthy for your age. And I had laughed and said I'd been eating oatmeal for 40 years, and she said to keep it up. Someday, I thought. Then I thought, when exactly? I booked the gold leaf compartment. It was the second-tier cabin. Not the very top, but close. A private room with a full-length window, turn-down service, all meals included in the dining car, and access to the observation lounge. The total came to just over $2,800 for the 4 nights. I paid with my debit card, and I did not let myself second-guess it, because I knew if I slept on it, I would talk myself out of it and put the money back and spend Thanksgiving eating a turkey breast alone in my kitchen, being quietly furious with myself. I booked it. I closed the laptop. I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. I didn't tell my son. I thought about it, the way you think about lighting a firecracker. You hold it for a moment. You imagine the spark. And then you put it back in the box. I wasn't doing this to make a point. I wasn't doing it to punish anyone or to be discovered or to create some moment where he'd see me on the platform in a nice coat and feel ashamed. I was doing it because I needed to do something for myself that had nothing to do with waiting to be included. Thanksgiving week came. My son texted a picture of the mountains, blue ridgeline, orange trees, my daughter-in-law grinning in a fleece. So beautiful out here. 2 exclamation points. I sent back a heart. I was sitting in the lounge car of the Autumn Leaf Express watching the Hudson River slide past my window. The train had departed Penn Station at 2 in the afternoon. I'd taken a taxi from the hotel where I'd spent the previous night. I'd come up from Raleigh the day before, given myself time to settle, not be rushed. I had a rolling carry-on, a good book, and a thermos of tea I'd made in the hotel room. I was wearing my navy wool coat, the one I'd bought 4 years ago and barely worn because I kept saving it for a special occasion. This was a special occasion. The man who showed me to my compartment was named Theodore. He was perhaps 30, with a warm, formal manner that reminded me of a different era. The kind of courtesy you don't see much anymore, where someone offers their full attention without looking at their phone. He showed me how the bed folded down from the wall, where the extra blankets were kept, how to adjust the temperature. He asked if I had any dietary preferences for dinner. He asked if I was traveling to celebrate anything in particular. I thought for a moment. Then I said, yes, actually, an anniversary of sorts. He smiled and said he would make sure the kitchen knew. What I meant, what I didn't say, was that it was the anniversary of the day I stopped waiting. I couldn't give him a date for that, couldn't point to a calendar. But it was happening now. This was it. That counted. The first afternoon unfolded the way good things do when you're not rushing. Slowly, with room to breathe. I sat in the observation lounge with my book, but didn't read much. The Hudson was doing too many things at once. The light was changing every 20 minutes, going from gold to pewter to a deep rose as we moved north. There were farmhouses close enough to the tracks that I could see laundry on the lines. There were old stone walls running along the ridge above the river. There were herons standing perfectly still in the shallows, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. At dinner, Theodore came by as they were seating the car and said the kitchen had prepared a small amuse-bouche for me. A welcome, he called it. The woman seated across from me at the communal table introduced herself as Winifred, 72, recently retired from a career in healthcare administration in Boston, traveling alone. We shook hands over the breadbasket, and by the time the entrees arrived, we were talking the way women talk when they recognize something in each other. Not cautiously, not competitively, but with the ease of people who have already done the hard work of figuring out who they are. "Is this your first time?" Winifred asked. "On a train like this?" "Yes," I said. "First time doing a lot of things, actually." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant without needing me to explain it. My daughter kept asking why I didn't just fly to Portland, said a 4-day train was impractical. She speared a piece of roasted squash. I told her impractical was my new hobby. I laughed, a real laugh, not the polite kind, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. We had dessert and then coffee in the lounge, and then I walked back to my compartment and Theodore had already turned down the bed. There was a small card on the pillow that said, "Sleep well," in neat handwriting. and a square of dark chocolate on the nightstand. The window shade was up and the world outside was dark now. Just the occasional light of a town passing, a grain elevator, a water tower, a gas station glowing orange on the edge of a field. I ate the chocolate and looked out the window and didn't think about the group chat at all. The second day took us into the Berkshires. I'd been to this part of Massachusetts once, decades ago, for a wedding, but I hadn't seen it like this. From the inside of a moving window, at 15 miles an hour through the peak of color, the maples were doing things I didn't have words for. Not just red, crimson, and scarlet, and a deep wine color and an orange so bright it looked artificial, like someone had gone tree by tree with a paintbrush. I took photographs I knew would not do it justice. I took them anyway. Winifred and I had breakfast together in the dining car. She told me about her 2 daughters, her grandchildren, the way retirement had felt. At first, like falling. You spend your whole life being useful, she said, and then one day you're just standing there, wondering what you're for. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Took me a year to figure out that wasn't the right question. What's the right question? I asked. She thought about it. What do I want to do with the time I actually have? Not the time I think I should have. Not the time I think I should have. Not the time other people expect me to fill. The time that's actually mine. I thought about that for the rest of the morning. There was a scheduled stop in the early afternoon, 2 hours in Lenox, enough time to walk through town, see the Gilded Age estates that line the roads, pick up a few things from the shops along the main street. I bought a jar of local maple syrup and a small watercolor print of a barn in autumn that I thought might look right in my hallway. Theodore had suggested a cafe on Church Street, said the apple cider donuts were worth the walk. He was right. I stood outside the cafe eating a donut in the November air, looking up at a sky the color of a new dime, and I thought, I should have done this years ago. And then I thought, I'm doing it now. And that was enough. On the third day, we crossed into Vermont. The hills were softer here, rounder, like something had smoothed them down. The trees are past peak, but still beautiful. More russet and brown now, the kind of beauty that comes after the bright show is over, and what's left is just the thing itself. Quieter and more permanent. We passed through small towns I'd only ever seen on postcards. White church steeples against gray sky. A covered bridge over a shallow river. Cows in a field that didn't look up as the train went by. Theodore brought coffee to my compartment that morning without being asked. He'd noticed on the first day that I was up early, and on the second day he'd knocked gently at 7, and by the third it was just understood. I thanked him and he nodded, and I asked, as I had been meaning to ask, whether tipping was handled at the end or whether I could do it daily. He said either was fine, that there was no expectation, that the crew was grateful for whatever felt right. I said I'd been thinking about it since the first evening, and I wanted him to know that the care he'd taken, not just the practicalities, but the way he'd made me feel like the trip was worth marking, like I was a person worth attending to, that it had meant more than he probably knew. He looked at me for a moment and then said, very quietly, "It's an honor, ma'am, truly." I tipped him well. More than I usually would have. And it felt right, the way things feel right when you're not doing them out of obligation, but out of genuine gratitude. That afternoon, I sat in the observation car for 2 hours and let myself think about my son. Not with anger. I'd had enough of that, and it hadn't done anything useful. But honestly, the way you can think about a person, when you've gotten some distance and the hurt has settled into something more like clarity, I thought about how much I loved him, and how loving someone doesn't mean they won't disappoint you, and how being disappointed doesn't mean the love goes away. It just means you have to hold both things at once. The love and the hurt. The wanting and the letting go. I thought about what I would say when I saw him next. I decided I would probably say nothing about Thanksgiving, not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need him to understand it in order for it to have been real. Some things you do for yourself and they don't require an audience. I did decide I would tell him about the trip, not to prove something, just because it had been beautiful and he was my son and I still wanted to share beautiful things with him. That hadn't changed. The fourth day ended in Portland, Maine. We arrived in the early evening, and the city was lit up in that particular coastal way. Seafood restaurants with steamed windows, the harbor just visible from the station platform. the smell of salt air coming in cold and clear off the Atlantic. Winifred and I exchanged numbers on the platform. She said if I was ever in Boston, I should call her, and I said I would, and we both knew we meant it. There are people you meet and forget, and there are people you meet and carry with you. And she was the second kind. The hotel I'd booked for my last night before flying home the next morning was a converted Victorian on the harbor. My room had a gas fireplace and a window seat that looked out over the water. I ordered room service, chowder, brown bread, a glass of white wine, and sat in the window seat with the lights low and the fire going and watched the harbor lights reflect on the black water. My son texted at some point during dinner. A picture this time of all four of them around a Thanksgiving table, someone's relative's house by the look of it, green bean casserole, and a too-big turkey. Grateful for these people, the caption said. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked back out at the harbor. I was grateful too, for this room, for this fire, for 4 days of watching the world go by from a window seat on a train, for Winifred and her honesty, for Theodore and his quiet care, for the maple syrup I'd bought in Lenox and the print of the barn that was already, in my mind, hanging in my hallway, for the apple cider donut I'd eaten standing on a sidewalk in November, the air cold on my face, the sky bright and silver above me. For the version of myself that had opened the laptop and not talked herself out of it. I sent my son a heart. Then I set the phone face down on the window seat and finished my chowder. The fire crackled. The harbor moved. Outside, a buoy bell rang once in the dark. I was right where I was supposed to be. I thought a lot about what it means to wait for permission, not permission from a boss or a court or anyone with official authority, just the quiet, daily kind of permission we ask for without realizing it. The kind that lives in a group chat you weren't really included in a thumbs up your son gave before you'd finished reading, in all the years you saved a good coat for a special occasion that never quite arrived. I waited a long time, and I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I'm not someone who made one bold decision and suddenly became a different person. I was 67 years old before I booked that train, and the only reason I booked it was because I got tired. Not physically. I was fine, the doctor said so. But tired of the other thing. Tired of shrinking the size of my own life to fit inside someone else's plans. What I learned on that train had nothing to do with luxury and everything to do with attention. Theodore paid attention, not because he was required to, not because I'd demanded it, but because that was the kind of person he was. And the thing about being genuinely seen by another person, even a stranger, even briefly, is that it shows you the shape of what you've been missing. It holds up a mirror. I didn't realize how long I'd gone without that until he asked quietly on the first evening if I was celebrating something. And I had to sit with that question for a moment before I understood that yes, I was. I just hadn't known it yet. Winifred understood something I was still working out, that the question isn't what am I for anymore, but what do I actually want to do with the time that belongs to me? Those are not the same question. The first one keeps you looking backward, measuring your worth by what you've produced, who you've served, how useful you've been. The second one looks forward. It asks you to take yourself seriously. That takes more courage than most people give it credit for. I'm not angry with my son. I want to say that clearly because the story could be read that way, and that's not the truth. What happened between us was not a betrayal. It was a slow drift, the kind that happens in families when everyone is busy and no one is paying close attention. He loves me. I know that, but love and attention are not the same thing either, and for a long time I accepted one as a substitute for the other. That was my part in it, not his fault alone. Mine too. What I did when I booked that gold leaf compartment and watched the Hudson slide past my window was decide that my own life was worth showing up for. Not loudly, not to prove anything. Just quietly, on a Tuesday, with a debit card and a wool coat I'd been saving too long. That decision didn't fix anything that was broken between me and my son, but it fixed something in me. And I genuinely think that the version of me who came home from Portland, who had eaten a donut in the November air in Lenox and watched Vermont go rust-colored and slow through a train window, That woman had more to offer than the one who'd been waiting by the phone, not because the trip made me better, but because I'd stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing. That's the only thing I know for certain. The rest, I'm still figuring out.